Welcome back to another episode of Sal and Pals Go to the Movies. This is another Throwback Thursday review, and I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hi, guys.
And today we're going to be reviewing A Beautiful Mind. And just fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. After John Nash, a brilliant but asocial mathematician, accepts secret work in cryptography, his life is turned upside down. I'm going to start off by saying that this is a movie that was inspired by a true story, a real person who developed schizophrenia, and he also contributed to an established theory that revolutionized a field, and later in his life he won a Nobel Peace Prize for that contribution, and in the end he actually learned how to rationalize his schizophrenia and learned how to live with it. This film, to start off, reminds me of a recent film we reviewed, Words on the Bathroom Wall, that also had to deal with this condition. I really liked how they visually represented this condition of schizophrenia to the audience versus other movies that might take a different role. This movie, he actually saw people that weren't there, and that's how we knew that he was delusional in a sense and suffering from this condition. And also it made it easier to understand and take in this condition, so we actually could relate with this character and see what he was going through. Also, I'm going to touch upon the cast. It's a very good ensemble. We have Russell Crowe, Ed Harris, Jennifer Connelly, Christopher Plummer, Adam Goldberg, Josh Lucas, and Paul Bettany, Vision himself. Well, there isn't much to complain about the acting in this movie because most of these actors delivered in their job. A few actors stood out. I really loved Paul Bettany in this movie. He did an awesome role. Also, Russell Crowe, he sold the idea that he was suffering from a condition that we couldn't pinpoint at the beginning, and throughout the movie he just started developing his character. The next point is the story. It does a decent job of developing the main character, John Nash, and how he falls into his delusions and eventually how he finds his way back home, in a sense, to his wife. There is other characters in this movie, but it revolves around mostly John Nash. It does touch upon other characters that he interacted with in his life, but mostly its main focus is just him and the condition. And now I'm going to move on to my cons. Some characters were not developed as much. I know the reason was not to take away from John Nash and his light, but maybe I wish they would have developed his wife a little more, show what she gave up to help him, her sacrifices, show a few scenes here and there, maybe show what she had to do to support the family, take extra work. In that way, we could actually feel for her and then see how she was suffering, and eventually she would show her frustration, just point out what she was going through, because it wasn't just John Nash, it was also his wife. Same with Saul, his work partner. I would really like for him to be shown being worried following John Nash, and at the same time John Nash think that he's actually a Russian spy and accuse him of that, and that's how they break kind of their little friendship, and it builds a conflict that they have to resolve further down the line. The next con I have is, or should I say, just point out that even though this is based on a true person, it's not all that accurate. Some things were added while others were missing. For one example, the real John Nash never saw the hallucinations, he just heard voices, and this is not my con because I really enjoyed how they showed the hallucinations to us, the audience, to better digest the condition and relate to the character. But one thing that should have been added was the fact that his son also developed schizophrenia, but just like him, he learned how to deal with it, and I think that would have added a little more layer to it, showing that people who suffer from this condition can actually pass the illness down their bloodline, and basically drive the whole point home that there's no cure for this and not everybody deals with this condition the same way. Overall, I really enjoyed this movie, just like I did with Words on the Bathroom Wall. I would highly recommend people to watch this movie before they watch Words on the Bathroom Wall, the other movie reviewed. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my friend Touly and see how he saw this movie and what grade he gave this movie.
My review of the movie is going to be strictly based on the film itself. I have not read or know anything about the book that inspired this film, so whatever creative liberty they took to making this particular movie, whatever didn't align or did align with the book, I am not aware of, so I'm going to speak strictly about the film. So with that stage being set, yeah, I did enjoy this film overall. Loved the cast, and I liked how the film went about presenting these hallucinated characters that we as an audience weren't aware that they were until the big reveal later when John came back to Princeton University and was giving his presentation, and he was worried that he was being followed by Russian spies, and then there was that chase throughout the university which eventually just led him to get caught, and then you see him wake up at a mental institute. Then you see his wife go and retrieve those letters that he has been dropping off at this particular location. So that was when the big reveal came that, oh, some of these things that he'd been doing and people that he had been interacting with, maybe they're not real. So I thought the movie did a good job at hiding those things or making them him blend into just his normal daily job or livelihood until they eventually, made it apparent that, oh, these things that he had been doing aren't actually real. I thought the lead up to the reveal was good because I think for anybody who had never watched this film and just saw it for the first time, they might have got that same feeling that I did when I saw it for the first time. Definitely kudos there to the movie and how they handled that. However, that does present like a double-edged sword in a sense because, as Sal alluded earlier, the actual John Nash didn't actually see these visions. It was more about him hearing voices. So the movie here, with it presenting characters that John can interact with, it does present a dilemma because the film is going about it in a selective way in that whenever John is interacting with these characters, this is thinking about it in hindsight after knowing that he's suffering from schizophrenia and seeing these characters that are just within his mind. The fact that he's interacting with some of these characters in like a public setting makes me wonder why nobody else who was actually real didn't see that he was acting kind of weird until the later half of the film when it's been revealed that he does have schizophrenia. And because we know that he has it now, we see how other people are reacting to him whenever he's talking into space. And I found that to be odd because on one side, them being able to keep this sort of reveal behind the scene until they needed to actually show it. Sure, that's great, but it begs me to question why didn't anybody else notice all these weird stuff that he was doing beforehand and approach him about it, from maybe his wife in particular because of, how close they were, how supportive Alicia was to his roommate who was like apparently jumping for joy when his governing of like dynamics or whatever it was called was accepted. His roommate was like jumping for joy outside the hallway. I found that funny because in that scene, nobody noticed that John was kind of like looking in that direction. And, if I were in the room with John, I would have given this weird look or looked out the hallway with him. It's like, who is he looking at? And then later, when he came back to Princeton to ask for some sort of position at school because it would give him comfort and maybe help him deal with his schizophrenia, John reacted to this imaginary roommate of his. And of course, his friend, so to speak, saw him kind of do that. He reacted to it. And John was like, oh, can you just ignore what I just did? Again, it's kind of like the movie wants you to see what you want to see towards the end, but prevents you from seeing what they don't want you to see at the beginning to sort of give you that sort of effect that, oh, these characters are actually real for the first half of the film, but then they're actually not real towards the second half. Again, that's like a dilemma I feel like the movie came across when having John interact with these other characters that aren't actually real. I feel like if they were going to go this way, maybe they could have handled it in such a fashion that maybe when John is talking to these people, that he doesn't do it in front of anybody. Like maybe it's only in the confine of his private moments. Then it just blends in naturally to where he's at. And I don't have to think about, oh, why didn't anybody see him interacting with these folks? And then when somebody actually did, then you start to think to yourself, whoa, what's going on here? Like, seems kind of odd. And it just builds up to him losing it and then him getting taken to the Mental Institute. So I think I would have preferred it that way. But again, it's kind of like in hindsight, thinking about how the movie kind of began and ended. And also because this film felt like a biographical presentation, that some of the transitions were kind of rough because they wanted to get from point A of John's life to point B of John's life to point C. And you see him getting older, of course, during these transitions. And sometimes it feels like a chunk of his life was missing. And because of that, the pacing was off because I had to jump 2 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later. So for a couple of those transitions, I did feel kind of disconnected and I just have to accept whatever happened in between. Nothing big happened, but I'm assuming something big did happen. If again, this was based off a book, which would have been more descriptive and more detailed between these timelines that I felt the movie didn't really tackle. I mean, if I had a choice, and Sal mentioned Words on Bathroom Walls, which was a movie that we reviewed not too long ago, I would say I prefer Words on Bathroom Walls more just because we get to follow our main character from start to finish and I get to see how he felt and the sort of success he had and the sort of struggle he had to eventually get to a point where, okay, this is the climax, and then we deal with said climax and then we see him finally accept who he is, and then whatever happens there on after, it happens. Versus this film, it felt segmented at times. I'm not saying that it was difficult to follow, but it felt like it affected the pacing, and sometimes it led to moments that I felt didn't have enough time for it to build up, and it caused me to sort of do a double take because I felt like John's character wasn't set up properly for me to maybe feel the way the movie wanted me to feel at that moment based on what he was doing. For example, when he went back to Princeton and asked for that position so he could kind of use that to help him deal with his schizophrenia issue, and his friend was like, sure, do you need a room? And it's like, no, that's fine, I don't need a room. So I was like, oh, okay, so this is sort of like a new opportunity for John, and I wanted to see him handle handle this sort of new situation, and then, get to a point where maybe his schizophrenia kicks back in, and then he has another meltdown or something. But right after that scene, you see him already having this mental breakdown outside of the building, and people are looking at him weird. It's things like that, because I feel like the movie is segmented, and they just wanted to maybe capture moments that they thought were key to what they wanted to show us. I felt like the setup to some of these scenes didn't quite add up. I felt like moments like those should have deserved a little more seasoning until it got to those breaking points yet again for John, and to see how he deal with those situations. But maybe it's just due to the style of the movie, of it sort of being like this biographical sort of theme. So I still enjoyed the film overall. I would recommend it to people who have not seen it. My overall score of the movie will be a 7 out of 10.
I totally agree with you. The way they opted to put one thing and not another in the movie, it felt to me like they were nitpicking what they wanted and what would be more effective to the audience versus showing everything and just focusing on certain parts of his life. And that's how they did the time skips. But I really like how they kind of kept it like a secret that his roommate was one of his hallucinations. It almost gave me this Sixth Sense kind of vibe that we were at the end. It was the reveal and you're like, wow, I didn't see that coming. But eventually they start leading to the point where it's like, oh, this was not really there. Like you said, why didn't anybody pick up on this? He would talk about his roommate when people would have been like, we never see your roommate. Who's your roommate, kind of thing? Or question what he did or who he said he was speaking to. Things like that. But yeah, I also would recommend this movie for people who really want to sort of understand this condition. I'm not saying, this is a good example of the condition because every case is different. But if you want to see what people deal with this condition, this is one of the movies. And like Words on the Bathroom Wall is another one. My grade would be almost close as Touly's, 7.5 out of 10. I enjoyed this movie. I highly recommend it for people who want to watch this. So I guess that does it for this review of A Beautiful Mind. Please join us next time when we are going to review Primer.
Okay, so that way your double would find everything exactly the same later that day and get in the box.
Right. But also, at that point, I or my double or someone was in the box coming backwards. So who knows what that would have done if I would have turned the machine off.
Definitely.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can find our social media links below. And like always, keep watching movies.